Good to go.
Thank you very much. Well, just wanted to welcome you to Creative Space and Services, Libraries Supporting Media and Data Literacy. My name is Katie Kavanaugh Webb, and I work at Joyner Library, East Carolina University. And the reason I wanted to present about this at this NCLA virtual conference is because last year I wrote a book called Development of Creative Spaces in Academic Libraries, which covers this topic in a broad sense as it relates to library space and service planning. The book contains case studies of libraries that set aside space that's devoted to creativity and discusses best practices for how to make one of these spaces happen in the academic library. So I'm going to be covering my main points in the research that I did in brief, including a few highlights from the case studies in each of the models. My presentation today is going to be a great overview on how to offer support to students and faculty, even if you're not planning on creating a dedicated space in your library. So if you're just interested in hearing about the models, there'll be something for you. If you've already have a library creative space, there'll be something for you, and you'll also have a chance at the end to discuss successes or ideas in a group setting, since we are a smallish group here. So the next thing I want to do is take two polls, and I may have to exit out of the sharing to do this. I'm going to ask, the first question, how would you define a creative space? And please answer in the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go into the chat. So what we're looking for is how would we define a creative space, and just looking for chat. I'm going to type it in there, make sure. So we've got one person who said it's a space where students or users can create things. Another person says a space that allows patrons to explore. These are both good answers. And for the sake of keeping going, I'm going to go to our next poll question, and that is, how many attendees here already have a creative space in their library? I will define that in a moment, but if you think you have one, how many people in here think you have one in your library or are looking to have one? So I'll type that into the chat as well. So at UNCG, they have a digital media commons, and also Terry, I'm not sure where you're located, but they have a digital media commons as well, where students can work on. Oh, at UNCG also, okay. Anyone else want to say whether they have one or not? Well, we will have a chance to talk at a later time. I don't want to take too long on the polls, but it is interesting to see what you have at your institutions. So I'll move on with my presentation and just talk about why libraries? Why would you have a digital media or data literacy initiative in your library? Well, the library is seen as what Ray Oldenburg, a researcher looking at urban sociology, calls a third place. The first place is a person's home, and the second place is their office. But the third place is a location that is considered an anchor in the community, a place where you can interact with other people, and it's not inside your work environment or your home. So a library is a key example of a third place in Western society. And I was thinking to myself the other day, it's one of the only places you can go nowadays where you don't have to buy something to be there. Even at Starbucks or something, you're going to buy a drink. As the purveyors of literacy on campus and the place where many people come for help, the library is often perfectly poised to be the location where students and faculty are going to come for assistance when they're realizing creative projects. And libraries are also seen as innovators, especially when it comes to technology. An example is that when I was working at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Merritt Library, we were the place that people could come first to check out an iPad. And people checked them out for many reasons. Some people just wanted to see what all the fuss was about and have their hands on a $600 piece of equipment without paying for it. Others wanted to look at the technology and see what they could do about creating applications for it. And they were kind of those people who are thinking about how it could be used. The iPad's a more recent example, but it was not all that long ago that libraries were the place to convert your old home VHS to DVDs or tape cassettes to CDs and things like that. I think we can all think of ideas going back even further as far as technology goes, but as librarians, you can see we are often poised at that cutting edge of technology, and we may not even know it. So what is a library creative space? We talked about a place in the library where somebody can create something, but we should probably talk about what we mean by creativity first, and what that has to do with digital media and data literacy. So when I say creative, you might be thinking of a painting, but like the one behind me, or other traditional humanities-based ideas of creativity, like a poem or something like that. But instead of limiting the scope of your definition, I want you to think also of creativity as in the phrase research and creative activity. So something that academics and librarians are usually familiar with. So to me, creativity also includes products of research, whether that be a project that uses data to create a graph, a map, maybe a video, or even a presentation that a faculty member plans to give at a conference, such as the online one you're at today. So getting back to library creative spaces and defining that. Eric Johnson from Virginia Commonwealth University coined this phrase in his book chapter called The Future of Library Space, which was published in 2017. I'm going to read Johnson's definition, and I know reading can be kind of a boring thing to do in a presentation, but I want to make sure that I hit all the high points. Just click through some of mine here. So this is Johnson's definition. The term library creative spaces is used to encompass a number of different kinds of library service spaces that focus wholly or in part on content creation as opposed to content consumption alone. That's a big one. Recognizing that under this definition, the entire library could maybe considered a creative space, as indeed it is. The term here is used specifically to refer to spaces that are explicitly set aside within a library to focus on the creation of non-textual content, which includes drawings and photographs, audio materials, videos, three-dimensional objects, whether those be handmade or 3D printed, programming electronic devices, computer coding, and other programming, web-based multimedia, and more. Such spaces will typically offer 1, dedicated space, 2, tools, materials, and equipment for use by patrons, and 3, some level of support, whether in the form of staff expertise and facilitation, classes and instruction, online resources, or some combination of those. They are typically open to the entire constituency of the library, end quote. So in this book's chapter that he wrote a few years back, he only included makerspaces, digital media labs, and digital humanities labs as library creative spaces. But that was his definition. I'm expanding that definition of a creative space and have considered 5, so 2 extra, to be supportive of creative space in the academy. So I'm going to define each one, and then do know that there are some that are hybrid spaces. So first one is a digital media lab, and some folks from UNCG said they have a digital media commons, something kind of similar. So that is devoted to the creation of multimedia, including digital video, video games, audio, images, and the like. A digital humanities lab is made available by a library to support the needs of scholars or faculty who are conducting high-tech humanities research, and these use multimedia, GIS, and other data. A data visualization lab is used for training and analysis of statistical information, geographic information science, or GIS, as I mentioned before, creating graphs and charts, designing posters, or the rendering, reading, and analysis of data. A knowledge market. This may be one that you haven't heard of. It brings together student support units on campus, and they are all in one place. So that usually appears in the library where they have library, the writing center, the speech and communication center, tutoring, and campus IT, some combination of all of those all at one desk. And then maker spaces. Most people know what that is, but a good definition of that is a creative DIY space where people come together to create or invent or learn. And in libraries, specifically in academic libraries, though also in public libraries, they often have 3D printers, electronic kits, software, and hardware supplies, and even things like tools. So there's lots of things that this might look like. They may also have a name like a hacker space, a Fab Lab hack space, or something like that. So it's not always called the maker space in the library, but that's what that is. And then lastly, as I mentioned, there are hybrid spaces, and they can take on many different forms of one of these models. So a digital humanities lab or digital media lab might also have a maker space or some corner of it that's a maker space. And so that is something that you might see as a hybrid, and I'll talk about that a little bit in my presentation. So I am going to show some of the items in the latter part of my presentation, show you some of my case study schools, and each of those will dive into one of those models. But before I do, I want to talk about each of the different library spaces, how they differ from each other, and what things come together to make those things different. So the first thing is that each library creative space is going to be different based on the model, of course, but the funding, the space available, and kind of the ethos of the hosting institution and the goals that you hope to solve are going to all feed into that. So I found through my research of looking at all these creative spaces over the course of a number of years that the following list that's on my slide here is going to affect the design and choice of all the different space and services at an institution. So those are impetus, primary audience, funding model, physical size, the range of amenities offered, and staffing. And I'm going to talk through a few of these in my presentation now, along with, you know, I'm not going to hit on everyone, but I'm going to hit primary audience first. So the first thing that you got to think about for one of these is that the audience for a space is really going to define this. And it can kind of run a continuum between the amount of time that's spent supporting students and the amount of time that's spent supporting faculty. It's not necessary to choose one or the other. Very few of these spaces are going to be on one complete end of the continuum or the other. And most of these spaces have the capacity to help both faculty and students, but it will define the outreach, the mission, and what the space looks like if the audience is considered before any other factor. So as I've found, many of the research institutions that I looked at tend to have faculty-focused spaces, whereas smaller or regional colleges and universities tend to have a focus on student success or engagement or other initiatives like that. They're going to have more of a student focus. I also found that there is a focus on skills or services, and each library space is going to fall somewhere in this graph for the amount of resources devoted to these areas. And you know, every librarian loves a Venn diagram. So, so these are going to be the ways that they build data, media, and digital literacy for their patrons. But the faculty-focused spaces tend to tip more towards that research side on the right, and the student ones focus more on technology skills. But there are spaces that I'm going to show you that kind of fit in the middle. So the mastery of a specific software platform is going to fall somewhere in that technology skills, or you know, the production of creative work is going to go into that research area. There's another continuum that I found for supporting patrons' learning, and so it runs the gamut from hands-on teaching to completing a project together or physically doing the tasks necessary for the patrons in the space. So think, if you will, of an example of data analysis. Data visualization labs could maybe help their visitors to learn to use the tools, or they might end up partnering with faculty and others and conducting the number crunching and analysis for them. The kind of do it for you service may require the librarian to be a co-author on that, and in some rare cases, there is a cost associated, although that is pretty rare. Similarly, a digital media lab will get requests to complete video editing projects for a client rather than to teach a visitor how to edit the video themselves. And so this is represented here on this continuum. Library creative spaces usually offer training, such as one-on-one consultations, group consultations, and workshops. The types of workshops might include teaching specific software tools, informing newcomers of core concepts that they cover, or idea sharing about similar projects being done in the space with others on campus who are already doing this work. Another thing that varies widely is the size of space dedicated. So the physical size of the new space being conceived is going to depend on the budget, of course, as well as the space available in the building. So at Joyner Library, we may have a space available for something like that, but if the library is smaller or it's undergoing a renovation, for instance, that space might be larger. But it is possible to have portable or mobile versions of the spaces that we're discussing here if a space is not available. It's also possible to start a service like this out of the office of one particularly motivated librarian or staff member or somebody who's been hired to do that work. So the services, equipment, and scope of assistance rendered to the users of the space are going to be determined by the size. Amanda Goodman's report on digital media labs, which was written for ALA Tech Connect's Library Technology Reports, lists 4 sizes, including portable, small, medium, and large. Portable spaces often consist of a cart or a carrying case that holds the equipment and can be brought from place to place. Since they're mobile, they don't take up much area in the library, and when they're not in use, they can just be put away. And they can pop up anywhere in the building or even in the community. A small lab usually comes from converting a pre-existing room in a building like an office. But a large lab or center usually consists of multiple rooms or studio spaces off of that room. Larger spaces might also offer computer labs, meeting rooms, individual studio spaces for those engaged in this creative work. And they may include an immersive environment or technology showcase that allows visitors to interact with the technology directly. As the size and budget of the space increases, of course, more of the amenities will be possible. Some schools are starting small and then growing their spaces as the demand for services picks up. Another thing to think about is staffing models. So in addition to the size of the space, the model by which it's staffed is going to be an important consideration.
Hello.
It's also going to depend on funding, just like the space. So the number of people may grow over time as services pick up.
What's up?
But here are some of the models and how they work. And do make sure that you keep yourself muted during this. We will have a time to talk at the end. There's a single librarian model. So one single librarian is hired, or their role is a task, such as consultations. There's also a team of librarians model, where there's lots of people pitching in here. A decentralized model makes use of people in other roles that may have a small stake in the space, such as teaching or research faculty or subject specialist librarians, IT staff, campus IT type folks, or others. Another one you might not know about or have maybe heard about is a community-led support model. This one is common in knowledge markets and in makerspaces because the training might come together as a group of students who are hired or volunteers. It's usually peer-led, so the people who are doing it are, again, students or something, and they help them reach each other's goals. A mixed model is usually a team of librarians, highly trained support staff, graduate students, maybe fellows or others on campus. So, it doesn't have to be one cut and dried model. Faculty sometimes offer advice through a steering committee. So if they've already been a leader in digital humanities, they may serve on a committee that helps come up with ways to bring in other faculty. So I'm going to change gears now and talk about some of the case studies I studied for the book. And I had about 13 case studies in the book. And so I'm going to start with those and talk about them. There will be time for questions at the end and a time for chat, so please do be typing those into the chat box, and I will address those at the end of this part. So the first case study I want to talk about is East Carolina University, which is, of course, where I'm at. But I did want to say first off that I am not the librarian in charge of the Makerspace, and that the work that I'm talking about here is not work that I did myself. So the people who are running this Makerspace are in the Teaching Resources Center. So we have had a lower tech Makerspace in our library since 2003. And that's a lot earlier than you'll hear most Makerspaces in the academic library literature. But the focus of that Makerspace has always been helping pre-service teachers to make posters and other displays and things for their classrooms. But over the last few years, the TRC at ECU has added a high technology 3D printing lab, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner of my slide. And we took a pre-existing meeting space and turned it into this lab. We offer introductory workshops throughout the fall and spring semesters, as well as a print-on-demand service that allows students to print things that they may have designed or that they found online. They also have a space for small groups to meet or be trained, and they have supported a summer ventures program for middle school and high school students over the past 2 summers. So I also like to focus on a story for each of these if I'm able to. The bottom picture shows you an example of work that's being done in this space. ECU has a medical school, and Joyner Library helped create a rib cage out of the 3D printed model here. And they were going to do a surgery, a very difficult surgery, using something called titanium mesh. So the man who you see pictured here had been suffering from an extreme form of scoliosis, and he had undergone a number of previous surgeries that left him with a very unique bone and tissue structure. So what they did was they printed out this rib cage and some examples of his tissue structure, and then they did a dry run using the 3D printed model of the surgery before they actually made any cuts on this gentleman here. And in addition to help that we've given to the medical school, we are also assisting with dental molds for the dental school, and the engineering school has a number of products that get printed as well. So this is highly used, and not just for teachers. As I mentioned before, the focus of the space is for teachers, but we are getting requests from all over campus. So talking about the different sliders that I have there, the more tech-focused part of the Makerspace at ECU is run under a single librarian model. We do have some undergraduate students who work with that librarian. The space lies more on the side of being student-focused and showing them how to complete a project, but faculty do use the space, as I mentioned in the example. The focus here is on building digital literacy. And the support is pretty evenly distributed between research, teaching technology skills, and course support, which is actually quite different than most Makerspaces, but here we do see that. But the normal focus is on teaching technology skills. Because the technology is kind of a hurdle to learn, the final slider about supporting visitors to the space is close to the designation of showing people how, as I mentioned, but there really is some of the other two. For instance, I printed out some ornaments over Christmas there, and they mainly did them for me. Here, I'll show you if you can see me in the little, got the Christmas ornament here. So I picked that out online, and they did it for me. So that is East Carolina University's Makerspace. I also wanted to talk about a data visualization lab. So the next place I'll talk about is Georgia State and their Curve lab. And this project includes a complete redesign of their library, but specifically this area is on their library's 2nd floor. And it cost $1.2 million to open in 2014. So quite an investment here. They have an interactive wall, and they thoroughly researched this before installing. When I talked with them, I got to see some of those planning documents, and it was very interesting. That on the top photo, you see that the screen, it's very unique. It's 24 feet by 4.5 feet high, so 24 feet long, 4.5 feet wide, and it has 25 million active pixels for a total of 108 square feet of touch-capable technology. So you can see he's got his finger on there. This space is a bit of a hybrid. It's a focus on data visualization, but they also help with digital scholarship and engage in 3D modeling. But the focus is mainly on that data visualization and research. The space itself is built to be modular to allow for group collaborations, and their main focus, they like to focus on interdisciplinary projects that bring together different fields of study from the university and beyond. And an example of work that's being done here, as I mentioned, I like to tell a story with these. They hosted a conference for the Smithsonian's Human Origins program. And during the conference, researchers from different institutions across the entire globe came and looked at digitized mineral samples taken as drill cores out of the earth. And they put them up on this long screen, and they could see from these different sites in Africa, they could see, what kind of changes that were happening in the environment millions of years ago. And so they had people who were, soil scientists, they had sociologists, they had all sorts of people who came together and looked at this stuff together. Quite an interesting concept. So although the mission of CURV includes undergraduate researchers, much of the research that's being done is initiated by faculty and graduate student requests. The focus is on building data literacy, and although this space is not considered 100% faculty focus, the main focus in that second graph there is on researchers. The second graphic here shows that the majority, okay, I said that, but there is some support for course support and teaching technology skills, but they're more focused on showing people how to use their resources and doing this research with people rather than completing a service rendered. CURV is run using a mixed model for staffing. They do have a director of the space, and they have a data services team that helps visitors via consultations. And then they also work with campus IT. So they have a little bit of a mixed model going on. The next case study I want to talk about is a digital media lab, and it's at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and it is a lot more student-focused than faculty-focused. They do get requests from time to time for faculty requests, but they have a video production studio, audio production studio, self-use video studios, a media editing lab, collaboration spaces, gaming, and a loanable technology service. So this is a lot like the place that I worked at the University of Wisconsin, and I know that UNCG and NC State and others have a space like this. So in addition to this space, I want to mention that the UIUC, the University of Illinois, is so large that they also have a scholarly commons and a data visualization lab, but those are in other libraries. And for the purposes of my book, I just looked at the case study of this digital media lab. They are working to kind of bring those spaces together on a shared platform, but as of right now, I believe they're still administratively separate. So the Media Commons opened in 2013, and it has had several revisions and additions over time. The original cost to refresh an existing space in the library was around $500,000, and that money came from a student technology fee. The images on the slide show a green screen at the top, and so that's a space that they can check out and record. And then at the bottom, you'll see that they are checking the loanable technologies out to each other. So as I was mentioning, this is more student-focused than faculty-focused. They're not really creating things for people. They're really showing people how to use the stuff and then helping them make that reality. So they do support courses there. They have a film studies course that makes a documentary, and they have foreign language course where they have people who come and record themselves speaking in a foreign language. And also, like most digital media labs, they are going to have kind of a mixed or community support model, because they rely heavily on student workers to do things like check out equipment, run the space, and give consultations. Not all digital media labs are run that way, though. Okay, another thing I want to include in the case study is a knowledge market, because this is one that we don't hear about as much, but they're becoming a lot more prevalent in American libraries specifically. Grand Valley State University, which I had the honor of being able to visit, is a premier example of a knowledge market. Their space was envisioned during the completion of a building project that created a completely new library. So there's really no cost numbers I can give you on how much this costs, but the library was outfitted by Steelcase, so of course it's very beautiful, and it won many design and service awards. So the knowledge market model is a place where students come in and receive help from peer consultants trained in one of multiple areas, including the Writing Center, library research help, presentation help, and data visualization. So as you can see in the bottom image, students walk up to a desk, kind of like the Genius bar at a Mac store, and a greeter will help them triage any problem they have. Sometimes they're finding that students don't know what problem they need help with or who to go to. And so then they get them to the right consultant. Excuse me. It's not shown in this picture because they're wearing their street clothes, but now student consultants at GVSU wear a little vest or a lanyard to show which support unit that they represent. They can also send feedback about the session afterwards through an online program to the faculty member who assigned the project. So faculty members are not at all the audience of this, although they may tell somebody to go visit there. When it's not being used for the knowledge market, the space is open and can be used for study space. So as you see at the top picture, they have these kind of space delineation things, but it's really open. And then the tables that are in those spaces where those consultants are meeting with a student, those can actually be used for study spaces when it's not in use. So the GVSU model is community-led support model 100%. They do have, people who train the students up and who work to schedule them and make sure that the quality remains high, but the students are always going to meet with other highly trained students for all of the interactions. The knowledge market model is 100% student focused, as I mentioned, and for those librarians wondering, well, how does that work with library support? For library research help, they do have a way where they can call in a subject librarian, and the majority of visitors to the space have been freshmen and sophomores. So this is kind of like an entry-level thing where they get help maybe for their core courses at the beginning of their time at the university in the knowledge market, but then they learn about the librarians there and then go to a librarian-led consultation one-on-one once they become upperclassmen. So that's something they've actually found over the course of doing this for a number of years. The focus of this space is all kinds of literacy, including media, data, and digital literacy, and that is done through mainly the support of courses, but there are some technology skills that are built in the course of that in those one-on-one meetings. The consultants are almost entirely focused on teaching self-efficacy, and they don't do it for a person as a service. That's really not what they're going for. I don't have a story about this one really, other than to tell you that this is a really neat way of doing things, and I know that the University of the University of Colorado at Aurora campus is doing this as well. Yale is an example of a digital humanities lab. The space is primarily used to meet with faculty who are starting or continuing a project in the digital humanities, and that would use something like mapping, text mining, or other analysis using technology. You can see their space here on the slide, but I will tell you that this is a temporary space that they're living in until their new space is completed. I do think they're probably either just moved in or have moved in by now. Yale is grant funded with a $3 million grant. This goes to pay for their staff salaries, the construction of this new space that is not pictured here. It's in a former book reserve reading room that they're renovating, and an internal granting program that they used as a kind of Kickstarter program for all the new digital humanities projects that they're trying to do. In addition to supporting the needs of mainly faculty and graduate students, the DH Lab works with the Office of New Haven and State Affairs on their Pathway to Arts and Humanities and Pathway to the Sciences programs. These have resulted in joint workshops with middle and high school students and their local community. They also collaborated with nonprofit organizations such as History Makers, which is an African-American video oral history collection. And they have a Beyond Borders symposium every year, which is co-organized with a student group on campus. So that's more of a showcase where they show what kind of projects they're able to do through this lab. The focus of the Digital Humanities Lab is normally on faculty, with a secondary focus on graduate students and doctoral students. As I mentioned on the last slide, Yale is engaging with undergraduates and the community in some important ways, so I don't want to make it sound like they're not working with students at all. Their service focus is on research, and some of the faculty are starting to assign some digital humanities projects where they build them into research projects for their assignments, and then that adds to the information of these digital humanities projects. But you know, more of the focus is on research. And they're building literacy skills, media literacy skills. Their staffing model is a mixed model, but it's primarily a team of librarians model. They do employ postdocs, and they take feedback from a steering committee that has faculty from different disciplinary departments who have already done a DH project or know a lot about that. They employ a number of specialized employees who help their faculty get their ideas off the ground. They do some work for people. Usually that initial Kickstarter project helps them get started and then gets their work off the ground, but then the hope is that they will take it on their own. So this would include things like coding or creating a website or a hosting and then running some text analysis software or something like that. So I'm at the end of my presentation here, but I don't want the conversation to stop there. Now that you have an idea of what a library creative space is and some examples of how academic libraries are serving the needs of their patrons, I'm happy to answer some questions. And then when we have some time left, I'd love it to start a conversation about your creative spaces and directions you see for that. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide now, and if you have any questions, put them in the chat, or even if you want to take yourself off of mute and ask those questions or start a conversation, happy to do that as well. Doesn't look like any questions came up during the course of my presentation, but I am interested in hearing about creative spaces that people have in their libraries, so feel free and to come off of mute and talk about that.
Katie, I have a question for you.
Yes, wonderful.
What is your connection with some of the other universities? How have you connected with them?
Well, for the in the course of my research, I went to Duke and to NC State. I went to UNCG. I mentioned going to Grand Valley State University. I visited a lot of places in person, but then also worked with them to write up the case study and get information. So I when possible, try to go visit those places and see how they're doing things. My work at University of Wisconsin-Madison is what got me interested in this topic. I worked in something that's a lot like a digital media lab, although it was kind of a hybrid model. And it was very much like our Teaching Resources Center here at East Carolina University, but it was its own standalone place. And so that's how I got interested in it, is that I was, working in one of these before I came here. And then I consider myself a maker in my own right. So visiting places like this when I'm able to, for, like when I'm at a conference or on vacation or something, is something that I just started to do. So does that answer your question?
Definitely, definitely. And actually, you have a comment there in the chat box from Terry.
So, yes, I actually visited. So the comment was from Terry, and she said UNCG also has a maker lab in the education department, which is linked to the Teaching Resources Center. I actually visited that space as well when I came for the Academake conference, which happened a few years back and was grant funded. So I've also visited that that space as well. Are there other questions I might answer about this, or would anyone feel comfortable chiming in person to talk about this further? Well, if not, I am open to speaking with you further about this. If this is a project that you are considering undertaking, I'm happy to meet with you, maybe online as we are doing now, but with fewer folks, and discuss anything that you may have questions about in the future.
Thanks so much, Katie.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to stay in the room and wait for other questions, or are you good to go?
I can. I think you could. I can stay if you want, but let's end the recording now, and then
sure.
I'll